Hello, I'm Jonathan Menn, the Director of Equipping Church Leaders East Africa, or ECLEA, and this is the first in a series of lectures on the ECLEA book, Biblical Stewardship. Now, this book and all of our books are on the ECLEA Courses and Resources page of the ECLEA website, which is www.eclea.net. And I would encourage you to have the book and read it, because the book will contain far more detail than I will be able to go over in these lectures. I will be, of course, hitting, I think, the high points and the most important things, but there's going to be a lot more detail, of course, in the book. Now, many people, when they hear the word stewardship, they think of money, giving money to the church. And part of stewardship, of course, involves money. But as we're going to see, stewardship involves every area of life. And so let's take a look at that. In this lecture, we want to begin by talking about the meaning of steward and stewardship, and look at the nature of stewardship. And then we'll briefly consider three of Jesus's parables which talk about stewardship. So first of all, what is a steward? Well, there's a Hebrew phrase found in the book of Genesis which describes a steward as the person who is over the house or household of someone else. In other words, a steward oversees another person's house, their household, their businesses, things like that. He's delegated and entrusted with authority and is accountable to his master for the management of the master's affairs. An example would be Eliezer, who was the steward over Abraham's household. And in fact, with Eliezer, he was responsible for Abraham's family. It was Eliezer who was appointed with the responsibility of finding a wife for Isaac. Now, in the New Testament, there are two Greek words that are denote the position of steward, and basically those words describe a manager, a foreman, a guardian, the manager of a household or estate. Now, we need to know, every Christian is called a steward in the New Testament. 1 Corinthians 4, verses 1 and 2 say, Let a man regard us in this manner, as servants of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. In this case, moreover, it is required of stewards that one be found trustworthy. 1 Peter 4, verse 10 similarly says, As each one has received a special gift, employ it in serving one another as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. And church leaders are specifically called stewards. Titus 1, verse 7 says, For the overseer must be above reproach as God's steward. So everyone, every Christian, and particularly church leaders, are stewards of everything we have. Now, this was indicated in the very beginning, in Genesis 1, when God said, Let us create man in our image, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, over the cattle and all the earth, and every creeping thing. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him male and female. He created them. And God blessed them and said, Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish, the birds, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. That is sometimes called the dominion mandate, because mankind has been given by God dominion over the entire earth. And filling the earth and subduing it, those are the words of stewardship. In other words, God has given to men and women stewardship over everything. And the fact that stewardship responsibility was given equally to men and women, this indicates that there is a relational component to stewardship as well. We're not just stewards over things, we are stewards over people. So, for example, if you're married, you're a steward of your spouse and of your marriage. If you have children, you are stewards of the children. In Genesis 1, verse 28, the Hebrew term for subdue is the word kavash. It implies the use of controlled, thoughtful force. In other words, people are to act upon God's creation using all the knowledge and wisdom that they have available to them. Now, in Genesis 2, verses 15 through 17, it adds some information regarding the nature of stewardship. Those verses say, "Then the Lord God took the man and put him into the Garden of Eden to cultivate it and keep it. The Lord God commanded the man, saying, 'From any tree of the garden you may eat freely, but from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat from it, you will surely die.'" First, I want to focus on the words from verse 15 that the man was put in the garden to cultivate and keep it. Those are terms of stewardship. To cultivate, of course, means to work it, to till. And also, the Greek word means to serve. Now, to keep it means to watch over, to take care of, to preserve, to protect, to do something carefully, to guard it. That means that we are responsible for taking care of and protecting that which is under our authority as stewards. Now, when these verses also tell us that since stewardship is delegated by God, and it means that the master, whether it's Abraham having Eliezer as his chief steward, but God giving mankind our stewardship responsibilities, the master always is able to set the rules of our stewardship. So God told Adam, "You can eat of any tree in the garden except one, because there will be consequences." So the master can set the rules, and this also tells us that the steward is responsible to the master and must give an account of his stewardship, as we will do. It's interesting that in Genesis 3, when God kicked Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden after they sinned, he did not revoke their stewardship. They were told to go, and they still had the responsibility of filling the earth, cultivating the land, and so on and so forth. It was going to be harder now, but they still had the same responsibilities. And so we are stewards, again, over everything. We are going to be held accountable for what we do with our lives and everything that we had influence over. Now, since we are stewards, our first responsibility, of course, is to be in right relationship with our master, which is God. And the only way we can be in right relationship, of course, is to be connected to God through Jesus Christ by faith. I mean, you may not think of salvation by faith. It's by God's grace, but it's through faith. We might not think of that as part of our role as stewards, but if you don't have a right relationship with the master, you're going to fail in your stewardship responsibilities. Now, I want to take a look at 3 parables that Jesus gave in the New Testament that help us to see and that describes our stewardship responsibilities. The first parable is found in Matthew chapter 24, beginning at verse 45. Jesus says, "Who then is the faithful and sensible slave whom his master put in charge of his household to give them their food at the proper time? Blessed is that slave whom his master finds so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you that he will put him in charge of all of his possessions. But if that evil slave says in his heart, 'My master is not coming for a long time,' and begins to beat his fellow slaves and eat and drink with drunkards, the master of that slave will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour at which he does not know, and will cut him in pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." So notice something. In this parable, Jesus uses the typical type of work, distributing food, done by household stewards. And it says he's going to reward the steward if he's faithful, but he will punish the steward if the steward is unfaithful. So basically, this parable is telling us God rewards and punishes people at the final judgment on the basis of how they handled the stewardship responsibilities assigned to them. Many people seem to think of the judgment as just God asking, "Did you receive Jesus Christ as your personal Savior?" Well, obviously, that's a part of it. But no, this parable is telling us everything in our life is going to be, we're going to be held accountable for it. Our life will be reviewed to see whether we've been faithful or not. Because remember, everything in life, we are stewards over everything that we have any influence over. And so the parable is saying that God will reward or punish people at the final judgment on the basis of the stewardship tasks assigned. Secondly, faithful stewardship requires perseverance and consistency, because the end could come at any time. We don't know when Jesus is returning to the earth. I mean, he could come this year. He might not come for 1,000 years. But we know that we will appear before him within a few years, because even if Jesus doesn't come back for 1,000 years, we will all die before then. And third, so we need to bear in mind, we don't know when the judgment will come. And finally, this parable is telling us that those who postpone their responsibilities and do evil in the meantime may sadly discover that it's too late to make amends for our errors. That's why we need to persevere and be consistent and faithful now. Now, Jesus tells another parable in Luke chapter 16. And it's the parable of the unrighteous steward. Beginning at verse 1, he says, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and this manager was reported to him as squandering his possessions. And he called him and said to him, 'What is this I hear about you? Give an accounting of your management, for you can no longer be manager.' Now the manager said to himself, 'What shall I do, since my master is taking the management away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I will do, so that when I am removed from the management, people will welcome me into their homes.' And he summoned each one of his master's debtors and began saying to the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' He said, 100 measures of oil. And he said to him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, and write 50. Then he said to another, 'How much do you owe?' He said, 100 measures of wheat. He said, 'Take your bill and write 80. And his master praised the unrighteous manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the sons of this age are more shrewd in relation to their own kind than the sons of light. And I say to you, make friends for yourselves by means of the wealth of unrighteousness, so that when it fails, they will receive you into the eternal dwellings. He who is faithful in very little will be faithful in much, and he who is unrighteous in a very little thing is unrighteous also in much.'" Now, this is a strange parable, isn't it? Is Jesus commending lying and cheating and stealing? Not at all. This parable is telling us, as did the first parable, that all of God's people will be called on to give a reckoning of our service to the Lord. Now, this parable is also making clear that preparation for that reckoning should involve prudent use of all of our resources, especially in the area of finances. And as the owner, God has the right, even in this lifetime, to take away our stewardship privileges or responsibilities if we are not properly carrying them out. Therefore, we need to use our earthly resources to build God's kingdom, and by doing this, we will be securing our own eternal future. Now, but this is a strange parable, as I say. And why? Or let's put it this way. I mean, the key is found in verses 8 and 9, where the master praised the unrighteous manager because he had acted shrewdly. And Jesus goes on to say, "For the sons of this age are more shrewd in relation to their own kind than the sons of light. And I say to you, make friends for yourselves by means of the wealth of unrighteousness, so that when it fails, they will receive you into the eternal dwellings." What is going on here? It seems to me there is only one thing that explains this parable. The owner was commending this steward. Why? Because the steward acted to prepare for his future. He knew he was going to lose his job, and he wasn't strong enough to dig. He was ashamed to beg. He didn't have anything else to do. He didn't have any other skills. He had nowhere to go. So he did the one thing to secure his future. And what did he do? He went first to this person. How much do you owe? 100 barrels of oil. Put down 50. How much do you owe? 100 measures of wheat. Write down 80. He went to all of the people who owed his master money or things and cut the bills. Why? Because when he got fired, he said he could then go to this person and say, "You had a debt you couldn't pay, and I helped you. Didn't I? Yes. Well, now I need help." And so this person would help him. Then he could go to this person over here, say the same thing. "You had a debt, and I helped you, didn't I? Well, now I need your help." And he'd help him. Now, what's Jesus saying? He's not commending lying or cheating, but he's saying that the people of this age are more shrewd in relation to their own kind than the sons of light. And he said, "I say to you, my disciples, make friends for yourselves by the means of the wealth of unrighteousness, so that when it fails, they will receive you into eternal dwellings." Now, what he's saying is this. That unjust steward was acting to secure his own future. But for that steward, he was thinking of his future just from the time he lost his job until he died. But Jesus, and we should know, no, our future does not end when we die. In a real sense, our future begins when we die, and it will last forever. What Jesus is saying is, when he talks about the wealth of unrighteousness, he's talking about money. He's talking about the things of this world. And what Jesus is saying is, use your money, use your resources, use the things of this world to help the poor and the needy, to build my kingdom. Because every person, you might pay for tracts or Bibles or evangelism, whatever it is, discipleship. Every person you help to bring into the kingdom, or you help to disciple, what he's saying is, when you die, and money is no longer any good for you because now you're dead, those people, you've built the kingdom, those people will act kind of like a heavenly welcoming committee to welcome you to heaven, because they are there because of what you have done. So what he's saying is, we need to have an eternal perspective. We need to secure our future. But we do that by not storing up our treasure on earth by getting a big pile of money and just spending it on ourselves. No, we secure our future by using what God has given us, by being good stewards of what God has given us to help the poor and the needy and to build his kingdom now. Because then God will see that. And at the judgment, he will reward us for what we have done as his stewards. And his rewards will last forever. Now, the last parable along these lines is the parable of the talents. I won't read that one. I think most of us know it. It's in Matthew 25, beginning at verse 14, whereby the master was going on a journey. He called his 3 stewards, and to one he gave 5 talents, to another one he gave 2, and to another he gave 1, and then he left. Now, the first 2 put their money to good use. The third one hid it in the ground. But then, unexpectedly, the master returned home and held the stewards to account. And to the first said, "Look, master, you entrusted 5 talents to me, and see, I've gained 5 more." The master said, "Well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many. Enter into the joy of your master." The second said, "You gave me 2. I made 2 more." And the master said, "Well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many. Enter into the joy of your master." The third one said, "Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow. So I hid the talent, and see, here it is." And the master said, "You wicked, lazy slave, you knew that I reap where I didn't sow. You should at least have put the money in the bank, so that when I came back, I could receive what was mine along with interest. Therefore," he said, "take the talent away from him, give it to the one who has the 10. And he said, "For everyone who has, more shall be given, and he will have an abundance. But from him who does not have, even what little he has will be taken away. Throw out that worthless slave into the outer darkness, in the place where there was weeping and gnashing of teeth." Now, again, as with the other 2 parables, this parable is telling us that, like the master, God entrusts all people with a portion of his resources, and he expects us to be good stewards of what he has given us. And that can be financial resources, that can be talents. Maybe you're a musician, maybe, you're good in whatever kind of business, a shamba or a farmer. Whatever you have, you are a steward of it. And God expects us to use what he's given us wisely. Now, like the 2 good stewards, God will commend and reward those who have been faithful in our stewardship responsibilities in this life. But like the wicked servant, those who fail to use the gifts God has given us will be punished by separation from God and all that is good. But there's a few other little aspects of this parable that I think we should talk about. The first is this, that notice in Matthew 25, verse 15, notice that he gave different amounts to the different stewards. He gave 5 to one, 2 to another, 1 to a third. Why? Verse 15 tells us, he says, "To the one he gave 5, to another 2, and to another 1, each according to his own ability." And that's true for us. I mean, some of us have more money and things than others. Some of us have more children than others. Some of us have a better job than others. Some of us have, musical talents and abilities that others don't have. But what this is saying is, God has given us what we have and expects us to use it. But he's given different amounts and different things to different people according to our own ability, which means that you may have a very difficult or hard life. God knows that. But he hasn't given us anything that we can't handle. He's given it according to our own ability. And so, additionally, God is looking primarily to our attitude and to our faithfulness in what we have, not the specific size or the amount of what we have. Remember, one guy ended up with 10, another guy ended up with 4. So the first one had more than twice of what the second one had. And yet, God's commendation, the master's commendation to each one was exactly the same. He didn't say, "Oh, to you who have 10, that's wonderful. That's fantastic. You're a tremendous steward." And then to the guy with 4, he said, "Well, you did pretty good, but not as good as that guy over there." No, he said the exact same thing to both. "Well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master." So it's the same with us. We may not have started out with a lot. We may not have as much as another person has. But what God is primarily interested in is, are we faithful in the things that we do have, the things he has given us, the life he has given us? Are we faithful in good times and bad times, in poverty and in abundance? That's the main thing, because our commendation is not based so much on how much we have, but in faithfulness with what we have. And the third thing is this. A talent originally was a unit of weight. It later on became a unit of money. Now, a talent originally was based on what a person, the average man, could carry. Estimates, from what I've read, vary between about 25 to 55 kilograms. Later on, it became a unit of value equal to about 20 years' worth of wages. So a talent was a very either heavy weight originally, and then a very costly unit of money. Now, we need to understand, as 1 Samuel 16 says, God does not see as man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. Now, this is important. When we consider that a talent originally was a unit of weight, some people, again, we look at the outside and they say, "Oh, look at this person. He was blessed with so much money, and I have nothing. I'm in poverty," and so on. "I have a hard life. This person has an easy life. God has obviously blessed him." You're looking at things wrongly. God may well, because God gives us everything, and it may well be that those who have the fewest possessions are actually equivalent to the steward who got the 5 talents. And somebody from a Mzungu from America, he may have a lot, but I may be like the one who only got 1 talent. Why? Because God looks at you and says, "Jonathan's a nice guy, but he doesn't have the ability to carry the weight of poverty, of disease, of whatever that I'm giving you. And I know you can handle it." And you see, if I'm faithful with the 1 talent I have, I will be rewarded at the judgment. But you see, don't look at the outside so much. Look at, yes, you may have a hard life, but God knows that. And he's putting you in position because he knows most people in the world throughout history and today have been poor. And he wants to see his faithful stewards, his faithful servants, being able to witness, being able to overcome trials, being able to be an example of Christ-likeness in hard circumstances. And if you are faithful with your 5 talents of hardship, at the judgment, he's going to say, I think, something like this: "You had a hard life, didn't you? But you were faithful with it." And now he's going to pull back the curtain and say, "Because you were faithful, look at what I'm going to reward you with now. Was it all worth it now?" And it will be, because now for all of eternity, you will have reaped the rewards of faithfulness in hard circumstances. So don't look at the outside. Remain faithful with what we have, because you will prove yourself to be a good steward and will hear those glorious words, "Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your master."